Welcome to the last session of the week. In this session, we will look at how Nihonga was introduced to Korea and how they impacted Eastern-style painting in Korea at the turn of the 20th century. At the heart of Japan's efforts to modernize its culture in the late 19th century was the development of Nihonga. Nihonga, which literally translates to Japanese painting, was introduced in the Meiji period to distinguish traditional Japanese art from the Western-style paintings, or yoga. While Japan had long established its own traditional painting styles, the rise of Western techniques and perspectives in the 19th century posed a challenge to its identity. Nihonga was, in a sense, a deliberate attempt to revitalize traditional Japanese art by maintaining techniques rooted in Japanese aesthetics, but adapting them to contemporary sensibilities. This included the use of traditional materials such as mineral pigments, ink, and washi paper, while also integrating elements from Western painting, such as perspective, shading, and realistic depictions of the human form. One of the key advocates for Nihonga during this period was Okakura Tenshin, who became head of the Tokyo School of Fine Arts in 1890 and encouraged students to innovate within the Nihonga tradition. The first important interaction between Japanese and Korean art in the modern period occurred through the introduction of Nihonga into Korea during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly under the influence of Japan's imperialist ambitions. With the annexation of Korea, the relationship between the two countries intensified, and the influence of Japanese art grew significantly within Korean cultural circles. As more students went to Japan to receive art education, more came to embrace Nihonga. It is important to note that the introduction of Nihonga to Korea was not simply a matter of artistic exchange. It was tightly bound to the political and cultural dynamics of the time, with Japan's colonial rule influencing almost every aspect of Korean life. In Korea, the introduction of Nihonga was initially met with resistance, as artists clung to their own traditional style of painting, mostly the styles taught and passed on by literati painters and court painters of the late 19th century. However, as Korea increasingly came under Japanese control, the influence of Japanese painting became more pervasive even in the arts. The Choson Art Exhibition, established by the Japanese government in 1922, was a significant platform for promoting Nihonga-influenced art in Korea. This annual exhibition featured a section dedicated to Oriental-style paintings or Eastern-style paintings, which included works in the Nihonga style. Artists whose works were accepted and featured in this exhibition gained recognition and established themselves as a professional artist in Korea. However, as jurors of the exhibition were predominantly Japanese, there was a need to cater to their preferences. Naturally, many Korean Eastern-style artists of the early 20th centuries went on to adopt the Japanese Nihonga styles in their works. Lee Han-bok, who had studied under Jo Seok-jin and An Jung-sik in Seoul, absorbed Nihonga techniques while studying in the Nihonga department of the Tokyo School of Fine Arts from 1918 to 1923. He participated in the first Choson Art Exhibition in 1922 and continued to exhibit works up to 1929, showcasing the adaptation of Nihonga's soft tones and flat colors. His approach to painting blended Korean subject matter with elements of Western realism and Japanese aesthetics, creating a distinctive style. Other Korean artists such as Lee Young-il and Choi Woo-seok also embraced Nihonga. Lee Young-il studied under Ikegami Shuo in the 1920s, while Choi Woo-seok trained at the Kawabata Art School in Tokyo. Lee Young-il's 1928 painting of children in an autumn landscape illustrates how Korean artists used Nihonga to depict local Korean subjects in a manner that was appealing to the Japanese. The children's vibrant hanbok, contrasting with the somber tones of the background, hinted at the local color movement that became prominent in Korea during the 1930s. We'll talk more about this soon. Kim Eun-oh, who we talked about in the previous session, was one of the most influential advocates of Nihonga in Korea. He spent 3 years in Tokyo, auditing Nihonga classes at the Tokyo School of Fine Arts from 1925. His works from the late 1920s onward show a confident engagement with Nihonga techniques, influenced by artists like Yuki Some. Kim's success at the Titan exhibitions in Tokyo in 1926 and 1927 strengthened his reputation. Kim was also a regular participant in the Chosun Art Exhibition, and his consistent presence at this event helped solidify the influence of Nihonga in the Korean art scene. Kimono produced numerous paintings of beauties, or miindo in the Nihonga style. This work, depicting a woman gazing at a white bird perched on a hand under a wisteria tree, strongly conveys a flat and decorative impression through the gradiated color planes and delicate brushstrokes. The decorative arrangement of the wisteria in the background, the extremely ornate depiction of the woman's hanbok, composition, and coloring techniques clearly reflect the influence of contemporary Japanese bijindo, or portraits of beauties, which became a significant trend in colored figure painting during the Japanese colonial period. In the 1930s, Kimono helped establish the Chosun Art Institute, which taught Nihonga, oil painting, and sculpture. Although the institution closed in 1938, Kim continued to mentor future artists in his private studio, influencing figures like Chang Woo-sung and Kim Gi-chang, who also incorporated Nihonga styles in their artworks. However, the strong Japanese undertones in these artists' works were often criticized by those who saw such painting trends as a form of cultural imperialism and the artist's condemnation of Japanese occupation. Some critics argued that the promotion of Nihonga through institutions like the Chosun Art Exhibition suppressed traditional Korean artistic expressions. Indeed, Japanese styles and artworks became controversial after liberation, as Korea grappled with the aftermath of decades of colonial occupation. During the 1940s, amidst Japan's military expansion, artists like Kim Gi-chang participated in exhibitions that depicted war-related themes, which reflects the pressure on artists to support Japan's war efforts. These works sparked ongoing debates about the role of art in society, which continued after Korea's liberation in 1945. The 1930s saw significant shifts and tension in the Korean art scene, with artists questioning Japan's cultural dominance and exploring themes and styles that reflected Korean identity, and continued to current and ongoing discussions on the identity of Eastern painting and Korean painting. The concept of local color in Korean art history emerged as a response to the socio-political and cultural upheavals of the colonial period. During the Korean Empire and the subsequent Japanese colonial period, artists grappled with the challenges of preserving a distinct Korean identity amid rapid modernization and colonial domination. The 1920s and 30s saw a growing emphasis on capturing the essence of Korea's unique landscapes, customs, and people, which came to symbolize resistance, pride, and a yearning for cultural autonomy. Under Japanese colonial rule, the notion of local color also became entangled with colonial policies that sought to define and appropriate Korean culture. From the 1920s, the depiction of Koreanness within artworks was actively promoted by the Chosun Art Exhibition. The term 향토색 or 반도색, meaning local color, was used to refer to such Koreanness that was framed within a colonial narrative. 향토색 was defined as the same as 지방색, and 향토예술 was defined as art based on the rural themes of 향토. As such, many artworks influenced by local color depicted scenes of an exoticized and romanticized rural Korea. The local sentiment of 향토 was deeply intertwined with the innate sentiment of loss that arose after annexation, and captured the inner lives of Koreans across all social strata during the Japanese colonial period. The homeland, or 향토, was imagined as an idealized, aesthetically uncontaminated space, unaffected by the modernizing forces of Japanese rule. Despite this emotional connection, under the colonial lens, local color became a tool to categorize and display Korea's cultural and artistic characteristics as distinct yet subordinate within the framework of the Japanese Empire. The Japanese administration encouraged depictions of Korea's traditional customs, landscapes, and people in a way that exoticized and othered Korean culture, presenting it as a quaint, unchanging heritage in contrast to Japan's modernity. This interpretation was institutionalized through the Chosun Art Exhibition, which favored works that showcased traditional Korean aesthetics, such as rural scenes, folk customs, and local architecture. These works reinforce the colonial narrative of Korea as a backward and picturesque colony in need of Japan's modernizing guidance. By the 1930s, Korean critics began to condemn the Joseon Art Exhibition and its overt focus on primitive color schemes and subject matters. They called for a more genuine expression of Korean local color, free from the confinements of materialism. The preference for local color that had dominated art during the Japanese colonial era was seen as closed off and regressive. However, for Korean artists, local color also took on subversive meanings. While some complied with the colonial aesthetic, others infused their works with a deeper sense of national pride, subtly reclaiming local color as a symbol of Korea's unique identity and resilience. By focusing on traditional Korean subjects, folk art, and rural life, artists could visually assert their cultural uniqueness in contrast to the dominant Japanese culture. For them, local color was a tool to expressing national identity under colonial censorship and systematic repression. Moreover, it also contributed to the refinement of traditional painting techniques. Artists began experimenting with blending local themes and forms with modern techniques, which contributed to the evolving aesthetics of Korean art in the 20th century. This duality of local color highlights the complex interplay between cultural expression and political control as artists navigated the constraints of colonialism while attempting to preserve and reinterpret their heritage. Thus, local color under the colonial lens became a contested space where the meanings of identity, modernity, and tradition were negotiated. In conclusion, the legacy of Nihonga and Japanese cultural imperialism in the Korean Eastern style painting is both multifaceted and deeply complex. While Nihonga brought new techniques, materials, and artistic themes that enriched Korean painting, its promotion was inevitably tied to the Japanese colonial agenda, prompting critical reflections on cultural authenticity and artistic independence. The local color movement, born from the colonial gaze, both portrayed Korea as an exotic and naive colony and provided a platform for the development of a distinct Korean artistic identity. Ultimately, this dual legacy catalyzed the emergence of a new generation of artists who would drive the modernization and diversification of Korean art, marking an important turning point in its evolution during the 20th century.